morning.
Tornado Bridge, got a train going over in a couple minutes. As soon as he's clear, I'll open the bridge for you.
All right, Roger that.
This will be for the train electrification, folks.
Exactly.
Thank you, Operator. Bridge will be coming back somewhere around 1, I guess.
Yeah, Bridge, you're welcome.
Oh, there's like a bleach solution.
Yeah. Oh, that's everybody always been touching. That's plastic or metal. Come on. You want plastic cans?
Okay. a twist, Tom.
There's buoy right there.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's going to have a rebirth this year.
Because it's running so hard, I can't see the buoys.
Okay, we're down here in the Mystic River in Noank with Captain Larry Malloy and Captain Tom Jannke aboard Annie, built in 1884, still working here in 94. What do you got over there on the culling table there, Cap? You seem to...
I don't know, but I got wet feet right here.
Yeah, those are pretty salty shoes you got on there.
Yeah, we got a few oysters here. Some of this stuff is 88 set to come out of Pequannock River. Don't seem to want to grow. We have an oyster here that's the original set in the Thames River. That grew. But my father, he always claimed the Pequannock River oyster never grew, and I guess that's proof of the pudding right there. There's a cluster there, 3 oysters, 2 dead shells, but that oyster is 88 set. That's about 6-year-old oyster, and I don't think it'll ever get any bigger. Tom, he's sorting them out here. He's putting them in the baskets. Got a kind of a low crew here today. Could use a little more help.
All right, what's he banging them there for? What does that show?
He is testing them to see if there's any meat in them. There'll be kind of a hollow sound if they are duds.
Does this look like a typical haul here, more or less?
Yes, for what we're doing. We got them pretty well cleaned up. And we're also using a little bit extra wire to kind of clean the bottom as we're going along and try to do, well, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Catch a few oysters, clean the ground at the same time.
It's a lot like farming then, that you have to tend the ground. You can't just go out there and reach into the pantry and expect to find something.
That is true. Right here where we're working, if you don't put the product here, you'll never have any product. Out here the water's too cold, you never get an oyster set. So you have to have ground in an area that will produce set. And it has to be transplanted from that ground to this ground. We usually wait until the oysters in the setting area get to be about 3-year-old, and then we transplant them.
Right, and these come mainly from the Thames River.
Correct.
How about the Aquatonic? You still use that? Is any of that out here?
No, I have kind of given that up. In fact, I've given up about everything.
Well, I guess things aren't the way they used to be. They never are. We might get into that a little bit later. As we're looking at some of this stuff here, these are baskets that are of a certain size for a particular reason and certain construction as well. It's not just a arbitrary the way it's rigged here.
This is a half-bushel basket. I guess it's legal to use a metal basket yet, although it seems so that everything nowadays has to be plastic. Is that right, Tom?
Plastic or metal?
Plastic, well, or metal. Well, this is metal.
No wood.
No wood. Now, in the old days, those baskets you used to see piled up around, and they were made out of what? You have one, I know, in your house you keep newspapers and magazines in.
They were made out of oak slabs. In fact, the baskets that you mentioned I have in my house, I probably watched that one being made by George Stevens in Guilford. And as I remember, that basket cost $3.50.
Yep, and I saw some down in an antique store in Guilford. I think it was over $500 now as an art craft type of object.
Yeah, the prices have changed.
And you used to have those stacked way up on the deck. I can see the price here. We're talking about money here. I can see the price on your ventilator. You paid $43.20, including the tax, or maybe that was the tax on it. This whirligig over here. Tell us a little bit about this yellow winch here. That's a new addition to the boat.
That's a Bloom winch. It's made special for me, special application. Not pleased with it. It operates a little too slow. And other than that, I think Bloom builds a pretty good winch.
But for years, you used something else. In fact, this is the first time I've seen that aboard this vessel. You used the heisters in back there.
Well, this vessel is equipped with a set of heisters that are installed below. Thought-ship heisters, that's one drum on each side of the keel. Probably built early 1900.
Okay, going to have a little bit of culinary delight here. Capt. Malloy is poised to do a little surgery on one of these. Is there a particular technique you're doing here so you don't impale your hand?
Well, this is what you call a side knife in the way I'm opening these. They several different ways of opening an oyster. Most people use a can opener or a screwdriver nowadays, but I never got into that. Well, I got the shell off anyhow. And there's the meat of the oyster. Here's a man here that's going to show you what to do with it.
Very good.
Have another or we'll spoil your dinner.
That is dinner.
Oysters for breakfast. It'll make a man out of them, as they used to say. That oyster came from where, Cap?
That oyster came from the Thames River, originally.
Yes, and it's been out here how long?
It's been out here a year and a half.
And what's happening to it out here that can't happen in the Thames?
This ground is for depuration, cleansing the oysters. The Thames River is in the polluted area, and you cannot market any shellfish out of the Thames River. So everything has to be taken from the river, planted on certified ground, and has to be on the certified ground. I think now it's 45 days. Used to be 21, but the state thought we could survive if they jumped it to 45 days. They are the only ones think we can survive. We don't think we can survive. They keep going up, increasing the limit, and not practical for the shellfisherman.
Well, yes, it's very difficult to get that idea across of how to make something work. What is happening here in biologic terms to the oysters when they're on this ground? What are they doing that allows them to cleanse themselves?
They're pumping water constantly, and through their system. And that's what cleanses them and gets them to certified category.
How does that certification process work?
Tom, can you answer that?
Well, they,
Excuse me here, let me go over here. He's going to tell us about the certification process.
after we put them on the beds, then they test them every so often, every couple weeks, and take bacterial counts from the oysters. And when the bacterial counts go down to their limit, which I'm not sure just exactly what it is, but very low, if not zero. In fact, I think it is zero. Then that number of days is the number of days it takes to get the oysters certified. They also have a fudge factor, I guess, that they throw in too, but I don't know much about that.
Now this they is who?
Pardon? They
Who is this
the State Health Department, I believe.
Right, I think that's the way that works. Now,
okay. Well, they set a limit on us, and then that holds then until they change what they're doing.
that's a limit in terms of what?
The number of time on the ground before we can harvest. And then we, after 45 days, they come out and take another sample. And if that sample is good, then they'll say, okay, you can go ahead. So it's 45 days plus the time it takes to get another, that one last sample.
Right, and where do they take that sample? I mean, they're down here, they take it off the boat, and then they put it in a car, and where do they go?
They take it to Hartford, and I don't know much beyond that it goes up to wherever their lab is up in the Hartford area. And we wait for a week and get our results.
Yeah, so by then you have a good piece of the season's gone by, huh?
Well, we stagger you always have to have oysters which are depurated so you can keep working. And you can run more than one ground, but you've got to keep them 500 feet apart in order to maintain your certification. So we're harvesting this ground, but we'll be planting further west very shortly, and that ground will be for taking oysters during the summer, and this ground will be basically closed down. We won't have anything on it, nothing to harvest.
So you're working the Noank grounds right the whole year around then, in different patches of it?
Yes, we work year-round. And whenever the ice is clear in the river and we can get out, we come out.
One of the things that's happening down here, of course, is you've got a big mooring fleet, you've got some big marinas here, and there's a certain kind of conflict that's arising there. We're kind of in the middle of that now. Don't want to say anything about that yet because we don't know quite how it's going to work out. I think what's important to realize is this ground has been operated officially at least since about 1905, and this harbor, of course, has been going for at least that long. And up to this point, they've been able to get along with each other. But with new regulations and so forth, we're going to have a problem that we're trying to straighten out. How long have you been working this ground, Cap?
My father, we picked this ground up in 1954, I believe, in the early 50s anyhow. And it did belong to Raydell's in Norwalk. And they purchased it from Fordham Brothers. Fordham Brothers had an oyster shop in Mystic, where the Lathrop Gas Engine Company used to be. And I understand they had their market oysters across from where the seaport is today. That would be impossible today to have market oysters in the Mystic River.
Well, there was a long bar out there, goes right out to the Joseph Conrad practically. I think they used to work that. And the Lathrop Engine Company, of course, is broken up into a bunch of different properties now, and that's one of the property where out of Mystic Cruises was there, and now the Indians have bought that property. So it's gone through a lot of changes recently.
I'll give you a little slack and see if that helps anything.
Yeah.
It's kind of a difficult moment. There goes a cormorant in the background, doesn't care about it though. What had going on here was Tom Jannke had to go out on the boom there to free the wire from the shiv. It jammed between the shiv and the shell there and had us paralyzed there for a little while. And water is still pretty cold. Don't want to see him go overboard, put all that gear on, boots and everything. He's going to have to go back out there now and try to snag that line with some kind of strap, that polyethylene. Phew. It's not the kind of thing you plan for, but it's a good example maybe of the kind of things that can happen on these
Hang on for a second.
commercial rigs where you've got a lot of heavy gear going and a lot of stress.
That 3/8 wire, that's what you're going to have to watch out for. 1/2-inch wire never got between the shiv and the cheeks, but 3/8 smaller, and I guess it will go between them.
Well, it did.
Sure did.
Well, that didn't come out too bad anyhow. That's another hazard of boating. Another hazard of boating.
Yeah.
Every day it's something different. Those shells he's dumping on the side of the boat there after he picked the oysters out of them, and they will be planted on the west end of the ground in a spot. We're not throwing them away. We're more or less saving them because you need the shells to get your oyster set. Use those as a clutch or a place for the oysters to attach themselves, and by piling them up in one area on the west end of the ground, when we need a load of shells, we'll just go there and throw on a load. So we'll take this one aboard and dump it.
All right, we're looking at some bycatch here. What do you got, Cap?
We got a couple of starfish. Starfish, they are bad for the oysters. They eat the oysters. This particular star looks so to me, one leg got broke off, but he's not hurting. He's going to grow a new leg. A lot of people years ago go to a beach and they pick up a star, and they figured if they tore it all apart, broke the legs off, and broke the legs in pieces, that would do away with them. But all they're doing is making a star out of the legs. The legs will grow a new star. The pieces will grow a new star. Not all the time, but 99% of the time. This ground, there is quite a few stars on it at times, but the stars seem to be small, and therefore we never ever thought that they done too much damage. Of course, if you let the ground go for 3 or 4 weeks, then you might see a little damage done. We also have a bug scallop. That's a seed scallop, not large enough to use at this point. Take another 6 months or so before that'll be large enough to use. Also, we have a dead winkle, also known as a conch. They will also eat oysters. So every conch we catch, we get rid of it. Tom just put a clam up on the bench over there. There it is, a couple of clams. We also have round clams on this ground, or hard clams. We catch very few with the oyster dredge because the clams, they're in the bottom. Oysters are on top of the bottom. If we caught quite a few clams, then the man doing the dredging would shorten up the wire. That would be an indication that he would have too much wire out on the dredge, digging the bottom. So therefore, we're not clamming at this time.
Now, if someone wanted to come clamming on this ground and not disturb your oysters, how would he do that?
He wouldn't. It would be impossible. There's been some talk about an oysterman has the right to the oysters, but not clams. As an oysterman, I cannot see that. If you pay the town for a piece of ground in a lease or buy a grant, anything produced or found on the ground, you would be entitled to. There would be no way that anyone could take clams out from under your oysters without disturbing the oyster.
Right, there's a state regulation about molesting, that's the word that's used, molesting the mollusks. What other activity, though, can take place on an oyster ground? I mean, can you put moorings on it? Can you put lobster pots on it? Can you flatfish on it? Can you water ski over it?
Lobstering and mooring would be illegal. Lobster pot, if you plant on the ground, you're going to kill the oysters that's the pot is sitting on, or in other words, the oysters that are under the lobster pot will not be able to feed and eventually die.
Also get tangled in your gear, because we had that happen a little bit earlier here today, because we got a strong moon tide and some wind, and that buoy was grassed down pretty well, right? And we picked it up without even being able to see it, because it had somehow come onto your grounds, probably rolled in there from the eastward. What about this other kind of activity, of going across the top boats and water skiing?
We have no jurisdiction on boats using the water on top of the ground.
How about sitting down there in a rowboat or something and flat fishing?
Flat fishing is perfectly legal.
Okay, so you're really talking about using the substrate down in the mud, and any kind of messing with that would be illegal then.
True, true.
Yeah. We started talking about bycatch here, and we said the starfish are bycatch. That's not really a bycatch as much as a predator. What other kind of predators do you have to worry about?
On this particular piece of ground, it'd be more or less the stars. Of course, if you had a school of seals, I don't know if you call seals in a bunch a school or what, but seals will eat your oysters.
That's interesting. Of course, we see those ones on the west coast with the urchins there on their bellies, and sea otters and so forth. I hadn't heard that one about seals yet. We know that, of course, they get the finfish, and there's a lot of seals coming in here, more and more every year, apparently, for whatever reason. It's an interesting phenomenon. How about drills, oyster drills?
Oyster drills, they are a predator too. You could have drills before you'd ever see them. They are so small that unless you knew what a drill was, you would just bypass it. The only indication you would have drill damage, if you saw a lot of the oysters were open, you look at the shell and you'll see a small hole. That would be a drill hole. Now, I don't know if the drills eat the oyster or if they just eat the holes.
A meal of holes, huh? Well, in any case, they make an entranceway in there for other bad things probably to come seeping in there and happen to it. What other problems do you have with raising these fellows here?
Nature. You're going to have to depend on nature more than anything. You do your work, you get the stuff down here, and if nature feels that you should make a living, maybe you would. Another thing you have to worry about would be a hurricane or a severe breeze of wind or something like that. You get wind and a hurricane severe enough, and the oysters will move. The bottom will build in over the top of them. In other words, bury them, and they will smother in the bottom.
How deep can they be and still survive in the mud?
Oysters in the mud, well, that I don't know. I've seen oysters pretty deep in the mud surviving, but we always felt that the mud bottom is not a suitable place to raise oysters. To get spawn, muddy bottom seems to be all right for catching an oyster set, providing you can keep your shells up above the mud.
What's the best kind of bottom then?
The best kind of bottom would be sand or firm bottom.
Of course, the more you oyster it, the more you clean out the mud, right?
You've got to, it's like farming, you've got to harrow the ground. We spend quite a lot of time just going around with no bag in the dredge, just dragging the dredge with the teeth, riling the bottom up, hoping that we can get some of the silt off, wash onto, I was going to say somebody else's ground, but that's not right.
No, it never goes there.
No.
When a ground gets closed down temporarily and so forth, then the tendency, I suppose, would be not to take care of it, and then it would just get worse and worse, and it'd be very difficult to get it back. Does that seem to be the way it is to you?
There's quite a lot of ground in the Thames River that we have where we haven't worked it enough. That has pretty well silted over. Yes, it will. If you don't work it, it'll silt over. Same as farming. If you don't harrow it, you're going to raise grass and various things.
Briars and all the rest of it, I guess.
Briars and everything.
The equivalent of that.
So it has to be harrowed. It has to be farmed.
Tell us a little about this table here, this culling table. I remember years ago when your dad used to be out here, this was made out of wood.
When my dad was out here, we didn't have a table. He worked altogether different than we do today. This boat had the dredges come in over the side on rollers, fore and aft roller and up and down roller. We didn't have this high mast and the boom and hydraulics and all that. Everything was more or less hand work, although we did have the heisters. And everything was hand picked. As the dredge come up, you dumped it on deck and you got down on your hands and knees and you hand picked it from the deck. The table, that come along about the early 80s is when we had the table put on. But of course, it makes a difference what you're doing. You really need a table for what we're doing right now. Sorting the oysters from the shells. If you were working to throw a load on, you wouldn't need the table. Years ago when we loaded this boat, you can notice the stanchions. We have stanchions on the side of the boat. There were stanchions the whole way around her. And they held the sideboards. This boat we used to load right to the wheelhouse windows. From the windows, from the wheelhouse right to the post. She carries 750 bushel, and I've seen a good many loads of that amount on her back years ago.
Why do you leave these boards up here, particularly that one over there by the pilot house ladder?
That is only plywood. Everybody asks what that's doing there. But when my father was 70, he was working this ground all alone on this boat. He stepped out of the wheelhouse, and the second step was water. He went right out from the wheelhouse overboard. And of course, he always, when he hauled the dredge, he'd put the steering wheel in a bucket. In other words, lash the steering wheel down. And you always turn on the dredge. And he just, after he got in the water, the boat was still going, and she come around a circle right where he was. He grabbed a tire. We always have tires hanging overboard, fenders. Don't look so good, but pretty nice to grab a hold of when you don't have anything else.
What time of year was that?
That was in January. I don't believe he stayed in the water any longer than he had to.
Then what did he do when he got aboard?
He right away stripped down and turned around and went home.
I think you told me at one point he went in the engine room, did a little dance in there.
Yeah, well, I guess he done that too. I wasn't here.
Yeah, well, that's it. That was when he was in his 70s, huh?
Yeah, he was 70 then.
Yeah, that seems pretty old, doesn't it, to be out here?
Well, I'm 76. I don't think I want to go swimming, even though the sun is out today. I don't think the water is too warm.
Yeah, I'm glad we got Tom in off that boom here a little while ago on that wire.
Yeah.
Well, kind of getting towards the end of things down here for a while. What do you see as a kind of future here?
Oh, hey, I am no longer the owner of this operation. Tom is the owner, and I'm more or less going along to keep him out of trouble and to have somebody crawl out on a boom with a wire gets stuck.
Okay, before we look in the future, let's finish with the past here. How long has your family been doing this, Cap?
My father, he started in the business, I would say around 1916, 17, along in there. This vessel, the Annie, spelt A-N-N-E, was built in Smithtown, New York in 1884. So she's getting to be long in years. I can remember the boat. I was maybe 4 years old. We lived in Greenport. And I remember my father taking me down to the shipyard. He had this boat hauled out, and he was having a round stern put on her. She was built as a sloop, had the square stern, and she was approximately 40 foot long in those days. We came from Greenport, moved to New London in 1928, and started the business in the Thames River. And at that time, in those days, we had ground over in Gardiner's Bay, and we'd run from New London to Gardiner's Bay probably 3 times a week. 1934, we had an oyster shop in New London, across from the railroad station, and that lasted until the 1938 hurricane. We wound up with just the concrete floor. The building, that was scattered all over.
What happened to Annie in that blow?
The Annie, my father sold this boat, I believe, in 1926 or 27 to Washington White. Washington White sold to Robert M. Utz, and after the hurricane, 1940 or so, we got this boat back from Utz. So she was out of the family for a few years at that time. Been in the family ever since 40 or 41.
Yeah, up at Harrison's Landing, basically there,
yes.
Opposite the subbase.
Right, Harrison Landing, opposite the base.
He did a lot of other work with it. I remember your dad had all kinds of stuff he did here. He used to go out to Gull Island when they had the Gull Tern colony out there. And he had all kinds of jobs and errands he'd run besides just the oystering with this boat, the old kind of waterman way. You've done a lot of that yourself. Yeah,
done quite a lot of it. The oyster business or the shellfish business is not always a profitable business. You have lay years that you just lay and wait for things to happen. You do your work, but if the Mother Nature don't work with you, then you're going to have to start something else.
What are some of those other things? I know you ran potatoes, you run all kinds of gear here and there and stuff.
Well, during the war, we carried building materials out to the forts when the forts were starting to build up. Sand, gravel, bathtubs, windows, whatever. Any type of building material. We've done that for a few years.
That's the New York Islands you're talking about out there.
Yes.
Plum
yes.
and Great Gull.
Great Gull, and also Fort Wright, Fisher's Island.
Was this the boat you helped repair the lighthouse, Race Rock with, or was that Alice?
No, that was another boat. That was the Alice that we worked on the lighthouse. That was, I believe, in 1954. We done that job.
That was for a whole month you're up in there, right?
True.
Which is amazing if you know a Race Rock that you get that kind of weather out there.
Get that kind of weather out there, it is amazing. So, other than that, what else?
Well, a whole lot of other stuff, I guess. Let's get Tom over here and maybe talk a little bit about the future for this boat and this industry. Tom Jannke.
Of course, could say that this boat was rebuilt in 1951, cut in half, and 8.5 foot added to the middle of her. So she wound up being 49.5 feet long. So
why did you do that?
To make a bigger boat out of her, I guess, actually.
Yeah,
in those days, well, when she was only 40 foot, she carried probably 500 bushel. And she was kind of small for what we were doing with. We also got to draw 6 inches less water. The Thames River, we have problem with the depth of water. A lot of the ground, we have to wait for high water to work it. And by cutting her in half, putting a piece in the middle, she came out of water 6 inches. In other words, she was drawing 4.5 feet, now she draws 4 feet.
When did you put a depth machine on this boat?
Depth machine has been on for about 2 years now.
Okay, Tom, if you want to come in here and...
The radar was just put on this year.
Yes, high-tech comes to Annie. Well, Tom, now that you have the boat here, and thank God that you do, Tom is a carpenter in the shipyard up at the seaport, among many of his other talents here, and that's a good trade to have under your belt when you're doing an old wooden boat here. What do you see Annie doing here in 2 years, we'll say?
Well, I'd like to keep her oystering. This is the goal. She's a terrific boat for her job. She's wonderful handling. She's got all the equipment on her, and she's just great. She practically knows where the oysters are. So she's just a joy to handle, and I'd like to keep her going and keep the grounds going, keep the operation going, build the operation a little bit. Like Larry said, he's getting on, so it's time to retire, and he'd been cutting down on the amount that he was working, and I'd like to build it back up again and get it so it's more than the current level, which is pretty much still a 1 day a week harvest, but we'd like to boost it up and get it to be full time.
Well, that's great, and we're fortunate to have the old Professor Emeritus here to make this nice transition and pass on some of his lore very generously.
of course, on average, we always do the change, too.
That worked out. I got a label on it.
Well, I guess we're done for the day. Because Tom, he's got to work all night.
Well, you don't need to go to the Benthic Fitness Center. None of this, huh? You don't need to go to the Benthic Fitness Center. No. Try to stay away from it. Take it back on the line. Yeah.
But this here is all patches.
Yeah, I see that now. That's kind of good there with the you're coming, Tom, aren't you? Yeah. I'm so anxious to go. I almost went to it last night. What? I'm so anxious to go. I almost went to it last night. See if the building was still there, huh? I was ready to go. Called Larry up, asked him about it. So that's